Welcome to True Crime Talks. Today we explore a twisted tale of forbidden love and deadly consequences. It was the summer of 2016 when 18-year-old Kyle Matthews moved in with his father, Stephen, and his new stepmother, Emily. The family had recently been blended after Stephen married Emily, a woman who was only 7 years older than Kyle. Though Emily was stunningly beautiful, she quickly became more of a friend to Kyle than a traditional mother figure. They often found themselves talking for hours, sharing secrets and confiding in each other. Kyle had always felt somewhat isolated, but Emily seemed to fill the gap. She was kind, understanding, and didn't treat him like a stranger, despite the oddness of their new family dynamic. As the days passed, Kyle's relationship with Emily grew more complicated. They began spending more time together alone, bonding over their shared interests and mutual understanding. Emily, while being an older woman, was still youthful and vibrant, and Kyle found her easy to talk to. What started as casual conversations soon turned into moments of intense connection. He began to feel that she understood him in a way no one else did, and their interactions became more frequent and charged with an unspoken energy. At first, their bond seemed innocent enough. But as the days went by, Kyle started to notice how Emily's glances lingered a little longer than necessary, how her touch seemed to last a second longer when they would pass by each other. It wasn't much, just small moments, but they were enough to make Kyle's heart race. He couldn't help but feel drawn to her in a way that made him uncomfortable, yet excited. It was the thrill of the forbidden, a feeling that was both intoxicating and confusing. Kyle had always been attracted to older women, but never in a million years did he think he would find himself feeling this way about his stepmother. Emily, for her part, was also aware of the shift in their relationship. There was something about Kyle that pulled her in, though she tried to ignore it. She'd always been an open-minded, free-spirited person, but even she knew this was a dangerous game. Still, when Kyle smiled at her in a certain way, when their eyes met across the room, she couldn't deny the electric tension between them. They didn't talk about it openly. Instead, they continued to spend time together, each moment escalating their connection, yet neither acknowledging the danger they were walking into. The longer they let it grow, the harder it became to pretend that their feelings were just innocent. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and they both knew that something was building, something neither could stop, even if they wanted to. And with every passing day, the thrill of their secret only made their bond stronger, leading them both down a path from which there would be no return. As the summer heat sweltered on, Kyle and Emily's relationship deepened in ways neither had fully anticipated. What began as flirtatious comments and lingering glances transformed into something much more intense. They found themselves seeking out each other's company more often, staying up late to talk or watching movies together when Stephen was out. What was initially harmless fun soon took a darker turn, as the line between friendly connection and something far more forbidden became increasingly blurred. It wasn't just the private moments that began to escalate; their physical closeness became more pronounced as well. Kyle, whose attraction to Emily had started out as a fleeting thought, now found himself obsessing over her every move. Her laughter, the way she twirled her hair when she was nervous, the scent of her perfume, everything about her seemed to haunt him. It was as if every detail of her was woven into his thoughts. She had become more than just a woman to him; she was the one thing he couldn't have, yet craved with all his being. Emily, too, felt the pull. She had always been confident, aware of her beauty, and knew the effect she had on people. But Kyle's attention was different. It wasn't just admiration, it was something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just a passing phase, a simple crush from a young man who didn't know better. But the way Kyle looked at her, the way he seemed to hang on her every word, made it hard to ignore. One evening, after Stephen had gone out with friends, they sat on the couch, their bodies mere inches apart. The air between them felt thick with tension, each of them trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. But it was impossible to ignore the electricity in the room. Emily had been leaning in to show Kyle something on her phone when his hand brushed hers. Neither of them moved away. In that moment, everything changed. Kyle felt a rush of heat spread through his chest, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. It was the first time they both realized how much they truly wanted each other. There was no turning back now. The desire between them was palpable, hanging heavy in the air. Emily's mind screamed for her to stop, to pull away before things went any further, but in her heart there was an undeniable thrill. Kyle, emboldened by the rush of emotions, leaned closer. The tension that had been building finally burst as they kissed. It was a kiss that sealed their fate, both thrilling and terrifying. The aftermath left them both breathless and filled with a mixture of guilt and excitement. They had crossed a line and they both knew it, but in that moment it didn't matter. What had started as a subtle attraction had now spiraled into a dangerous obsession. Neither one of them knew how to stop, nor did they want to. The affair had begun, and there was no telling where it would lead. Things took a shocking turn when Stephen, Kyle's father, began noticing subtle changes in his wife and son. At first it was small things, the awkward silences that would fall over the house when he entered a room, the sudden tension in the air whenever he would ask questions. He also noticed that Emily seemed to be distant, avoiding eye contact, and that Kyle appeared more withdrawn, as though he was hiding something. Stephen, always the observant one, felt like something was off. There was a shift in the atmosphere that he couldn't quite explain, but it unsettled him deeply. Stephen had always trusted Emily and Kyle, but as the days passed, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right between them. He could sense the growing coldness in Emily's demeanor when they would have dinner together, and Kyle, once so easygoing, seemed distant and secretive. The once warm and welcoming home now felt like a place filled with silent tension. Stephen couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed, but he knew that his family dynamic was beginning to unravel. The paranoia grew when Stephen began noticing strange signs around the house. A misplaced phone, a text message on Emily's phone that was left unlocked for just a moment too long, and a few too many odd looks exchanged between the two of them. It wasn't much, but the small details began to add up. His mind started to race, wondering if there was something more going on behind closed doors, something he wasn't privy to. One evening, when Stephen came home earlier than expected, he noticed Emily and Kyle alone in the living room, looking far too comfortable together. Kyle was sitting on the couch, a little too close to Emily, who was laughing a bit too hard at something he said. It was nothing overtly suspicious, but to Stephen it felt raw and unnatural. His gut told him that whatever was happening between his wife and son wasn't something he could ignore. Unable to dismiss his suspicions any longer, Stephen decided to take matters into his own hands. He set up a hidden camera in the living room, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was going on when he wasn't around. The decision to spy on them filled him with dread, but his desire for answers outweighed his guilt. That night, after Emily and Kyle had gone to bed, Stephen sat in the darkness of his office, watching the feed from the camera with a growing sense of dread. What he saw shattered him. The camera captured Emily and Kyle alone in the living room, their faces inches apart, their body language revealing the truth he had feared. There was no mistaking it. The way they looked at each other, the touches that lingered far too long, this was not the innocent bond of a mother and son. It was something far more sinister. The shock of seeing the two of them together in such an intimate moment left Stephen paralyzed with disbelief. His world crumbled around him. His wife, the woman he trusted, had betrayed him, and his son, his own flesh and blood, was part of it. The weight of the discovery crushed him, and for the first time he realized that his family was no longer the safe haven he had once believed it to be. Stephen's heart raced with anger, confusion, and a deep sense of betrayal. He had always prided himself on being a man of reason, someone who could handle anything that came his way. But what he had just uncovered, what he had seen with his own eyes, was beyond comprehension. His wife, Emily, and his son, Kyle, both of them had betrayed him in the most unimaginable way. He could hardly process it, let alone figure out how to confront them. But one thing was clear: he couldn't let this go. He had to confront them, face the truth, and demand answers. That night, Stephen made a decision. He would confront Emily and Kyle together, hoping to catch them in the act and force them to confess. He didn't know how it would go, but he knew he couldn't let it linger any longer. His mind was clouded with rage and disbelief, and his thoughts raced as he tried to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. The anger was building up inside him, and he could already feel his blood boiling at the thought of what they had done. When Stephen returned home that evening, his mind was a storm of emotions. The house felt eerily quiet, and the silence only made his tension grow. He walked through the door, steeling himself for what was about to unfold. As he entered the living room, he noticed that the door was slightly ajar and the lights were dim. The scene before him seemed oddly calm, yet Stephen's heart pounded in his chest. He knew this was the moment everything would change. Emily and Kyle were sitting on the couch, talking quietly. They both looked up as Stephen entered, their faces betraying a mixture of shock and fear. There was no hiding it anymore. The moment Stephen opened his mouth to speak, everything changed. He demanded to know the truth. He asked them both how they could betray him like this, how they could allow their twisted feelings to destroy the family. The tension in the room was unbearable as Stephen's voice grew louder, his anger spilling over. In a moment of overwhelming rage, Stephen lost control. His voice became a growl as he demanded that they explain themselves, but neither Emily nor Kyle could offer him any justification. They were paralyzed, caught in the web of their own deceit. The confrontation quickly spiraled out of control. Words became accusations, and accusations became threats. Stephen could feel his fury boiling over as the betrayal sank deeper into his soul. Without thinking, he grabbed a nearby object in a blind rage, striking Kyle with it. The blow was powerful, sudden, and fatal. Emily screamed, but it was too late. Kyle crumpled to the floor, lifeless. Stephen stood there, staring at the lifeless body of his son, his mind racing. What had he done? How had everything gotten so out of hand? The weight of the moment crushed him, but it was too late to turn back now. The blood had been spilled, and there was no going back from the horror that had unfolded before him. The family, once whole, was now shattered forever. The police arrived to find Stephen standing over Kyle's lifeless body, his expression blank and vacant. Emily, her face pale with shock, stood frozen in the corner of the room, trembling uncontrollably. The scene that greeted the officers was one of unimaginable horror, the air thick with the aftermath of violence. Stephen's mind was numb, his actions a blur. The reality of what he had done was slowly sinking in, but he couldn't fully comprehend the weight of the moment. His world, his family, had fallen apart in the span of a few minutes. As the officers moved in to arrest him, Stephen didn't resist. There was no point in running. He knew the damage had been done. His hands, still shaking from the rage that had overtaken him, were cuffed as the officers began their questions. Emily, too, was taken in for questioning, though her shock kept her from offering much in the way of answers. The once harmonious household was now a crime scene, the echoes of what had transpired reverberating through every corner. The house that had once been a sanctuary now felt like a tomb, filled with the weight of unspeakable betrayal. The investigation unfolded quickly. Detective after detective came through the house, piecing together the horrifying story that had led to Kyle's death. It was clear that the affair between Emily and her stepson had been at the heart of the tragedy. Evidence of their secret relationship, messages, photographs, and more was found scattered throughout the house, further confirming the twisted bond between the two. As the details of their illicit affair came to light, the public's reaction was one of shock and disbelief. The idea of a son and his stepmother involved in such a relationship was a taboo that most couldn't fathom. It sent shockwaves through the community, and the story quickly spread, leaving a trail of scandal and intrigue in its wake. Stephen's arrest was widely covered in the media, and soon the world knew about the tragic and twisted tale of betrayal that had destroyed a family. The charges against him were clear murder in the first degree. But as the case progressed, it became apparent that the psychological toll of the affair, the years of simmering tension, and the dark emotions that had been building for months played a crucial role in Stephen's explosive actions. Whether it was a moment of madness or a carefully planned act of revenge, the truth seemed irrelevant in the face of the destruction left behind. As the trial began, the grief and confusion that surrounded the family only deepened. Emily, struggling to cope with the aftermath of both her affair and the murder, became a shadow of her former self. The weight of her role in Kyle's death, the shattered family, and her own broken psyche was too much for her to bear. She had no answers for the world, and even less for herself. As for Stephen, the man who had once been the center of the family, he now faced the rest of his life behind bars. The murder had not only claimed Kyle's life but had destroyed everything Stephen had once held dear. The courtroom echoed with the tragedy of what had unfolded, the broken remnants of a family forever altered by a twisted, forbidden love that spiraled out of control.